Data has always been a difficult aspect of our work. For many, it's difficult to understand and hard to apply to the work your team does, or it does not give you the guidance you're looking for. For us, the Court Improvement Project, collecting court data through justice has been a very difficult task. The process of transforming the justice data system from case management system into a system that collects and analyzes data has been long and arduous. Our data reports may deceivingly look simple, but the fact is that for the past 4 years, we've had student workers manually going through each file to capture the dates of each pertinent hearing in abuse and neglect cases. Automatic data dumps of case progression data is still something that up until now has not produced reliable and large enough data samples. But I'm here to report today that the report you have in front of you is going to be the final report produced through this manual data collection. In the future, we will only be collecting data through the automatic data dumps. So I want to caution now that if the person doing the data entry in your county is not using the standardized codes for the pertinent case actions, that your data will not be automatically collected and you will not be receiving accurate data reports on court hearing progression. We are working with the folks at the Central Office of Justice. However, the most important person is the person doing the data entry. Linda Leatherman will be continuing to work with clerks. Linda, can you please stand and wave your hands? She is right in the front. We'll be working with Linda toward improving the quality of data in justice. Linda has a table in the exhibition area with samples of the 3A code manual that clerks should be using, so I'd encourage you to speak with Linda, especially if you're a judge or a clerk here. Okay, so I now would like to turn to your current data reports. Generally, some teams embrace getting as much data as they can. Some teams are ambivalent, and some teams resist using the data they receive. One common thing among all teams, though, is, and among many other child welfare stakeholders, is the struggle to understand how different pieces of data fit together, which ones matter and where, and how data can be used to inform and guide what teams are doing. So instead of immediately breaking off into team meetings first, we've asked our data guru, Andy Barclay, to join us and speak on this issue. Andy is an engineer and the co-founder and statistician of Fostering Court Improvement. In 2000, he founded and is currently the advisory board chair of the Barton Child Law and Policy Center at Emory University School of Law in Atlanta, which advocates for research-based policy and encourages students from law, public health, and social work into public interest career paths. Through his Fostering Court Improvement program, Andy works with 16 states, which includes Nebraska, to promote the meaningful use of outcomes data in juvenile courts across the country. Andy has worked in computing for over 30 years, both in the for-profit and public sectors, originally doing for-profit work in information technology, but now devoting himself full-time to child welfare work, where he focuses on training, research, statistics, software, and policy work in partnership with his wife, Michelle Barclay, who is the Georgia Court Improvement Project Director. For those of you who have been with the initiative since the beginning, you'll remember that Andy started a Fostering Court Improvement webpage for us in 2006, where AFCAR's and NCAN's data from HHS is posted by county and service area. That website now includes data by team. Andy has worked with us over the years on interpreting and better understanding data and has been invaluable to us in doing so. And today he's here to address some of the measures in your team data reports to help you think about how your team could identify problems through the data and set action plan goals for your team. If you're part of a local team, you received your team's data report at check-in. If you are a guest, you can turn to page 29 of your spiral binder to see some of the data measures that are in the team data reports. As you're listening to Andy, I encourage you to think about how you can use the data to guide what your local team works on, and how these different sets of data must be viewed together to tell a fuller picture of what is happening in the child welfare system in your community. Andy will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a very brief time for 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll give some instructions, and the teams will break out for the remainder of the time, which is about 30 minutes. So with that, I will turn it over to Andy, and I'll add this is the first time we've used Skype in a very large setting, so hopefully it'll work out okay, but if not, bear with us, and we'll try to make some corrections along the way.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. So if you can't hear me, just Kelly, you'll interject, right, and let me know?
Right.
Okay, good. So I'm going to start out with, I'm going to talk actually the whole time, I think, about one particular measure of something that happens outside the court. And I want to alert you to this because the data that I work with are mostly from your agency, which is HHS, and 90% of the work that they do is outside of the court. But there are things that you can affect from inside the court. And I want to bring your attention to one of those that I think is a particular challenge for Nebraska. It's the safety of your children who are not removed into foster care. So to kind of lay it out for you where all the children come through the HHS system, we start out with, in any given year, about 18,000 children investigated. It works out to 31 per 10,000 in the population. And I want you to take a look at that number, and here's Georgia's number. We do about 35, I'm in Atlanta, by the way. We do about 35,000 children per year, and that rate, in terms of the children in the population, is about 1/3 of what it is in Nebraska. So Nebraska does about 3 times as many investigations as Georgia, back to Nebraska here. And then out of those, we either have, for HHS determination, a substantiation or an unsubstantiated. The substantiated I'm going to call victims, and the unsubstantiated non-victims, because I count children, as the federal government does, and I'm trying to use their definitions. So that's about 19% of this total investigated, and about 5.8 per 10,000 in the population who are found to be victims. Here's Georgia again, about 5.2 per 10,000 in the population. So close to the same rate of victims, but you're doing 3 times as many investigations. So what does that mean? You're doing a lot of unsubstantiated investigations. 81% of the investigations done come out unsubstantiated. So your agency, HHS, is putting a lot of resources into investigating families where they're not finding victims. Now the drawback to doing that, and Georgia used to do it this way exactly. We had 80% of our investigations unsubstantiated. Now you see this is Georgia again, we're about 50-50. We now use those resources for in-home safety. Because we don't do so many unsubstantiated investigations, we do a better job of pulling out the higher risk cases earlier in the process, and we don't investigate unless we absolutely have to. And with those resources freed up, we do a lot more in-home safety in Georgia. So that brings me down to this box down here, the red or brown box, where you have 74% of the victims are not removed to foster care. So here's the part that you're seeing, 26% of the victims, which are 19% of the investigations. So that's where I come out with, it's a small slice of the total caseload at HHS that you're seeing in the courts. Now in Georgia, it's among the victims, it's a similar breakdown. About a quarter come into court and are removed to foster care, and about 3/4 are not removed to foster care. This is of the victims, substantiated. Now what about the safety of those victims? Actually, let me first cover this. Over time, this hasn't changed very much in Nebraska. I'm just putting this in here to show you that this red bit down here, which is the victims not removed to foster care, was a lot larger. It has decreased. The gold, which is the victims removed to foster care, has gone way down, which I'm sure you're seeing. So this is over fiscal years, and FFY 2011, this is the smallest rate yet. Now the safety. So for the children who are victims, 11% of them are re-victimized within 6 months of the initial victimization. This is the kind of measure we use for the federal measures to tell us about how the child protection system is working in terms of safety. We take an initial victimization and what percentage of those children are re-victimized within 6 months following that. We can also take a look at the non-victims in the same way. We have an initial response where we investigate and we unsubstantiate, so we find that they were not a victim. But how safe are they, really? Well, 3.6% of them are re-victimized within 6 months, but 11% of the victims are re-victimized in 6 months. So the victims are at a lot higher risk. and this is Nebraska in FY 2011. That works out to 402 children re-victimized. Most of those, the large majority of those, are the ones who were not removed to foster care. That's this brown box over here. 14% of the ones who were not removed to foster care are re-victimized within 6 months. That's very, very high. That's 355 children in a year. Now, in Georgia, I want to show you the similar rates. Here in Georgia, this brown box shows you the safety of the children who are the victims who are not removed to foster care. And in Georgia is 4%. So 14% versus 4%. So in-home safety, or I would call it not removed because they may not necessarily be in the home, is much better in Georgia for these children. And I think that's because we have the resources to cover them with caseworkers in the homes. Now, moving to your reports, this statistic, this non-removed victims re-victimized, is on your report. However, the number I've been using, you might notice, is the 6-month re-victimization. On your reports, it uses a 1-year or 12-month re-victimization. I don't normally use that, and that's because the federal standard uses 6 months. I do think it's a better way to do it. It's a more stable statistic, and with the federal standard, I have a reference point. So overall, nationally, we're shooting for 5.4% of the total victims, not just the ones who are not removed to foster care. Irrespective of the removal or not, we want to protect 94.6% of victims. That's the national standard. So that's a little bit different. So your rates that you're seeing on your charts will be about double what I'm talking about. So when I quote a national standard of 5.4%, the equivalent would be about 10% on yours. So Nebraska here on this is for District 8, Team 2. The team is, in 2010, is at 10%, which would be about the same as the national rate, and the state was at almost 25%, which is probably about double what the national would be. It's a volatile statistic, so in some of your smaller regions, you're going to see a lot of fluctuation in this, as you do in this region, in Team 2, District 8. It's going to go up and down a lot. So I'm pulling this one out because their District 8, Team 2 is currently the highest right now. As of the latest data, for the last 12 months, they had 20 victims who were not removed to foster care. Within 6 months, 13 out of those 20 were re-victimized. So that works out to 65%. Very high. Now, I'm going to show you something to show you over time how Nebraska compares to some other states. For this, I'm going to use what's called a motion chart. I'm just going to give a shout out to Gapminder and to Google for putting this together for us. There are a lot of tools out there that are great to use. So this is going to show on the vertical axis, going up will be less safety. So children less safe is up and down. And on the horizontal axis will be the time spent out of the home. So this is the number of days spent in foster care per capita in the population. Now let me switch to the chart. So this is the thing live. Back in September 2003, here's where these states lined up. Georgia had 9.1% re-victimization rate, which was very high. Back in 2003, we were screaming about how high it was. And we were doing about 21,000 days per capita it's actually per 10,000 children in the population in out of home. And Nebraska was over here at 8% and 41,000 days out of the home. And the size of the circles here is proportional to the population on that day, the child population on that day. So Nebraska was at about 460,000 children, Georgia 2.3 million, Illinois and Florida are in the 3.3 and 3.8 million. Okay, now watch. I'm gonna put this into motion, and you'll see that Nebraska's safety is getting worse, and we're spending more time in foster care. Florida, less time in foster care, but safety's not going the right direction. Georgia, the safety is going the right direction. Fewer children re-abused, and fewer children less time in foster care, but both fewer and less time. Illinois is hovering. Now watch Florida. Back around 2008, Florida starts going really in the wrong direction, and their safety gets worse. Georgia down, down, down into this lower left corner, and Nebraska up into the upper right here, which is probably where you don't want to be. So here we have, this is as of March 31st, 2011, Nebraska children were re-victimized at 11%, and you were spending 31,000 days per capita for 10,000 children in the population in foster care. So, I think I have time, maybe, Kelly. I'm going to show the Nebraska Teams chart, which is extremely complex, so put your glasses on. Now, this is where we start out in 2003, and I've highlighted just a few of the teams. Team Scottsbluff was very interesting, so watch what happens to them. They're the red one. The largest teams, District 4, District 3, and District 2, you can watch them. And here's District 8, Team 2, that I talked about earlier with the high rate. Let me switch here to a different measure of safety. These would be the children. This is the one, oh, actually I'm on the one that you have on your charts. So this is victims not removed to foster care. So these are the children that were not removed and they're safe. Now watch. So Team Scottsbluff is way up here with a lot of time spent in foster care. District 4, District 3, a lot of time in foster care. Everybody's pretty low, right around 2006. Although, look at the scale on here. It's much different from the other states. And I'll bring that scale down in a minute. Somebody's going off the charts here. That's District 11, Team 2. It's very small. Here comes Team Scottsbluff, reducing the number of children in foster care, and the safety got worse, and now it's getting a little bit better. It's much better. District 8, Team 2, oops, way up to 65%, but very few days spent in foster care relative to the rest of the state. So that's kind of what the picture looks like for your teams. Gives you an idea of the fluctuation. A lot of the smaller circles bounce around an awful lot, but Districts 3 and District 4 are smoother. They're more predictable. Let me switch back. So finally, getting to your action planning. Here are a few queries for you when you're looking at these numbers that Kelly has handed out to you in your team reports. Are all the children in need of foster care's protection getting it? And I want you to think about how you and your team could maybe investigate some of these questions, because I can't answer all of them from the data that I have. I have a lot of open questions. Are all the children coming into foster care in need of this protection? So this would go to, are you bringing a lot of non-victims into foster care? It does appear that Nebraska is, but a lot of other states do too, and that may just have something to do with the way your agency substantiates whether it's a victim or not. You can bring children in for risk, certainly, and you may not find that they were victims, and that's perfectly understandable. But do they need the protection of foster care? And can some of the resources that are being devoted to foster care protect children by monitoring them in their homes? And here, I guess I should have put in there as well some of the resources that are put into unsubstantiated investigations. Now, I know there's not very much you can do about that from the court, but for children coming into foster care, if they're not absolutely in need of it, then you could free up some resources that could be used to protect them in their homes. So here's an idea for coming up with some action items for improving in-home safety, because I think this is a challenge for Nebraska. I listed out some tasks here. HHS provides team members with case histories of 5 substantiated victims who were not removed to foster care and re-victimized within 6 months. So this would be an exercise that you might want to take on for your team, to just look at a few of the cases that I'm talking about where victims were not removed to foster care and their safety was compromised, and see if you can trace back to the root causes of what happened and where where an intervention by your team may have prevented a subsequent maltreatment. So that's the second task, is to document the root causes of the failure to protect. And then third, team members could think about, talk about, discuss process changes that might prevent the two most common modes of failure. And then finally, monitor the safety of in-home victims for 1 year. And you can do that through the statistics that Kelly's providing to you. So Kelly, I think that's it for me.
All right, we have brief time for a few questions. So if anybody has a question, we have microphones. We have one right here, and we have one right here. If you have a question about what Andy's talked about briefly right now, or if you have a question about a piece of data in the data report. Andy didn't produce them. He does have copies of them. We have one question right here.
What's the correlation for all the states between out-of-home time out of home and risk of re-victimization? It seems like before we had, it seems pretty high. When you get to the small sample size of our counties, it seems to fluctuate more. I didn't know if you had more states that we could see more data from, or if it's just these four.
Yes, I do have more states. Unfortunately, these are the states that allow their data to be public. So we need to get the federal government to report out more of this, I think. So no, I don't have that. I think I can. I think there's a way I can produce it for all 50 states, but I haven't done that. I would expect that they're going to line up something like these states have, though, with a very high correlation, just as you're saying.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Andy. So now's the